welcome to At Home YALC with Walker Books and Friends. I'm Alexia Casali, author of The Bone Dragon and House of Windows, and director of YA, and I'm completely delighted to be here today for this Teen Fantasy panel with authors Abiola Bello and Joseph Elliott. Thank you so much for joining us. These events have been coordinated by Walker's PR team, but include authors from many publishers, so thank you to everyone for being here to help us celebrate YA fiction. If you'd like to ask a question, please do that, and you can submit them at any time via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. If it doesn't come up, just click on the black bit and it will bring up a little menu bit so you can find that. And we'll come to those at the end of the session, so about the past mark, we'll move into that, so we've got loads of time for you to talk sort of semi-directly via me to our amazing authors, so feel free to do that. These events are being recorded and they're going to be uploaded to YouTube after the weekend. So if you're watching this later on, thank you very much for tuning in, but please note the Q&A is only for the live event. Don't forget to go and buy and read the author's amazing books, which are available to buy and pre-order. And I think the lovely team from Walker have put the links for that in the chat function, so do check that out. And we'll also let you know more about buying the books, or if you're watching afterwards, the links are in the description on YouTube. So I think that's our housekeeping messages. I'm going to launch in by introducing our amazing authors who I'm so excited to be here with today. Abiola's new book is the third in the Emily Knight series, and it's out on September 17th, so do go and pre-order that. You really don't want to miss it. Abiola won the London's Big Read 2019 award and was also nominated for the Carnegie. Emily Knight, I Am Coming is the new one, and that's the one that's out on 17th of September, and it's from Press, which she co-founded. And she also co-founded the Author School, which was shortlisted for the Great British Entrepreneur Awards 2016. By the way, if you're an aspiring author aged 5 to 21, check out their Little Big Book competition. I'm sure Abiola will be happy to say some more about that later if you're interested, so do ask some questions. And if you think that's not enough, she's also a professional dancer and teacher, and with a list of just amazing credits. I wish we had time to get through, but maybe she'll, again, tell us some more. So do ask us a bit about those things and things that are inspiring her and all the things that feed into her brilliant books. So Joseph Elliott is someone you may recognise from TV, but he's also a debut author. And The Good Hawk is the first in the Shadow Sky trilogy, and this came out in February this year from Walker Books, to amazing reviews and fantastic word of mouth. Kirk has called it rich in atmosphere while dripping with bristly violence, a fresh and exciting debut. But the review that I really loved was from the Down Syndrome Association, who welcomed the fact that although one of the main characters has Down syndrome, the novel is not about Down syndrome. I think that's a real tribute. Joseph worked for 4 years at the Westminster Special Schools, and I'm sure he'll be able to talk about how that inspired him to write The Good Hawk. And in fact, I think that's a great way to begin, hopefully. So could you both introduce your books to us and also tell a little bit about your inspiration? As I understand from reading up interviews before this panel that you both feel passionately that readers just couldn't find stories like yours, and you wanted to help fill those gaps. As the oft-quoted Professor Regan Sims-Bishop says in her article, Mirrors, Windows and Sliding Glass Doors, all children need books in which they can see themselves reflected, but we also need books that act as doors and windows to let us have a vicarious experience of different lives in order to develop our empathy and our understanding of the world and other people. So I think that's the start of our first question. Abiola, do you want to start us off by telling us all about the amazing Emily Knight series and your inspiration and all about that?
Hi guys, yes, so my series called Emily Knight. I'll just show you. I don't have book 3 yet, but this is book 1. I'm trying to be like a beauty vlogger, doing all that stuff. And then that's book 2. I basically created this book when I was 12. I used to watch an anime called Dragon Ball Z. I have an older brother and he had best friends who are Japanese, and they introduced us to anime. And then my family were like obsessed with wrestling. especially like when The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin were on it. And I also really love X-Men, like the comic books and the cartoons before all the movies came out. And I think I just really like the idea of being more than average and almost not having to explain why. Like with Dragon Ball Z, they're all warriors, they can fly and create fireballs, but it's never explained why they can do that. It's just they just do it. And like in wrestling, I thought it was interesting how someone could hit someone with a chair and they would get up and be all right. And I just found all that really interesting, and I wanted to really read something like that, and I couldn't find that. So I wrote this story about this teenage girl who was a warrior and who was trying to discover herself. And then when I went to university, there was an editor from New York that was one of my lecturers, and she really took to me and took to my book. And she was very pro-diversity before it was even a conversation. And she was like, why don't you make your main character black? Because she initially was white. And I was like, oh, I don't see why I have to. I thought she was saying it because I was black. She had to be black. And she was trying to explain to me that in publishing, there is a real lack of black characters. I think that'd be really good for you to do. And to be honest, I didn't feel comfortable with it because when there was a Borders bookshop that used to be in Angel up the road from my old college, and they had a section of black authors who wrote black books, and I would go there and it made me feel uncomfortable because I was like, I don't want to be here, I just want to be in the kids section with Jacqueline Wilson. So I thought if I did that, I would then box myself in, or someone would try and box me in. But I thought about it and I thought, actually, she's right. I would prefer if this girl kind of looked more like me. So I kind of rejigged it, and suddenly she wasn't like this poor girl. She was very rich and privileged, and she came from a legendary family, and she struggles with so many things, but it's not race related. So book 3, I Am Becoming, it starts like a few weeks after book 2, I Am Awakened, finishes, and Emily's finally reunited with her dad. They haven't seen each other in a long time, and they're trying to rebuild their relationship. And she's a teenager, in her head she thinks it's going to be so easy, and in reality it's a bit more complicated. They really don't know each other that well. And there's a lot of personality clashes between her and her brother and her dad. And they are going to battle Nisai, who's my villain. And Nisai is basically wants to destroy them. So the whole world is kind of involved in this epic war. And everyone has a bit more faith in the Knight family because Emily's dad has beaten Nisai before. They're like, oh my God, they're going to destroy her and it's going to be all over. And it's just not that simple. And Nisai basically sends warriors to Emily's house to burn her down. And that's kind of where everything kind of goes downhill from there. So that's pretty much the book. So yeah, that's I Am Becoming.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Abiola. I hope that that's really whetted everyone's appetite. So do dive on those links and make sure you're pre-ordering book 3. But you've got time to read books 1 and 2 in the meantime. So that's brilliant. Whereas, Joseph, this is your first book. Do you want to tell us a bit more about The Good Hawk? And
yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I am Joseph Elliott, author of The Good Hawk, which I've subtly plastered in the background. It's a book set, a fantasy book set in an alternate version of Scotland. It's about a clan that live on the Isle of Skye that get invaded and enslaved by the warriors from across the sea. And the only 2 people to evade capture are a 15-year-old girl called Agatha, who has Down syndrome, and a 14-year-old boy called Jamie. And they then need to cross the mainland in order to try and rescue their family. But the mainland's been devastated by like a mysterious plague 40 years previously. So no one set foot on the land for 40 years. So there's all kinds of mysterious, they're not quite sure what they're going to find. And the plague has kind of twisted some of the animals, and there's also these shadow creatures lurking that they have to try and navigate on their journey. In terms of what you were saying earlier, Lexi, about kind of diversity representation, so the book came about, like you said, while I was working at a school for children with additional needs. So Agatha was the first character that kind of popped into my head. She was the kind of inspiration behind the story, I knew straight away that she was going to be this really kind of feisty, loyal, no-nonsense character, very kind of headstrong and independent. And I also knew that she had Down syndrome. It was, I think, partly a result of the children that I was working with at the time. They were the children I knew best. But it also struck me when the idea came that, I hadn't ever read or even heard of a fantasy book with a heroine with Down syndrome. And I wanted to write a character that the children I knew best could look up to and be inspired by. And like you rightly said in your the quote you read out, also that other people reading it can develop empathy, which I think, it's just so important in kids' books in particular. That was kind of where she came from and how the book began.
Thank you both so much for those amazing intros. I mean, one of my favourite things about both books, which is kind of why I wanted to start there, was the books are about adventures and stuff, and they're not about necessarily the challenges and the labels the characters maybe would otherwise have. And I think it's really nice. I'm working on a book at the moment that is a rom-com, but it's that thing about you don't want to be pigeonholed and boxed in. You just want to write a really great story that should be for everyone, and it doesn't have to be separated out because the character in my book is disabled. But it's not about disability. It's just about hopefully a great story that should appeal to everyone and should include everyone. So because we're doing fantasy, I think we have to talk about world building. I think it's a rule somewhere. So everyone approaches world building differently, whether it's creating an entire fantasy world or riffing off the real world and adding fantasy elements. So I wanted to ask, what's critical for you guys? What are the little details that bring a world to life to you as a reader, but also more importantly as a writer? What are the things where they clicked into place and you're like, yes, I can see this world. I know how this works. I really feel this. Abiola, shall I come to you next, just so we swap?
Yeah, sure. Well, for me, a lot of people ask me all the time, like, how come you didn't make the world completely fantasy? Why did you set it in like a real life setting? But I think that's part of the things that inspired me. So like with X-Men and with Dragon Ball Z, is set within like a real life setting. They just happen to have these powers, and that's the bit I really like the most. Maybe because I watched so much anime, I got really into like Japanese culture and stuff. So I wanted Emily's school, which is called the Osaki Training School, to be very Japanese influence in like just the way they train, the way the school looks. I wanted that element to be in there. And I wanted the fantasy to really be more in terms of their powers, that she can fly, create fireballs, that they can battle and not kill each other every day. Like those are the things of the fantasy I wanted to show more so than the world. But I think I have a very odd obsession with just kind of being more than average, and I just like the idea you can look at someone and not know how magical they are. I think that's my whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. I love that idea. Well, you have such a long resume. I mean, I don't think anyone could imagine anyone could do that number of things. I think that applies to both of you guys. Joseph, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think kind of similar to Abiola. I think The Good Hawk is set in, I'd think of it as like an alternate version of Scotland. Obviously, it's kind of Middle Ages in terms of there's no technology or anything. It's all kind of warring clans. And I wanted to base it in the real world. I think that's, with any fantasy, the strongest fantasies they need to feel real, as well as all that you can be as fantastical as you want. But I think the fundamental thing is that it has to feel real. And for me, so I set it in Scotland. I created, I already had the landscape, and I specifically chose that because, I mean, Scotland's such an incredibly beautiful country, these amazing landscapes, but it can be very harsh and, brutal weather, and it just kind of reflected the world I wanted perfectly. So I then drew some elements from Scottish history as well. I mean, I think the best thing about writing fantasy is you can literally, make it up as you go along and take what you want, add what fantasy elements you want, add historical references, but without being too tied to a specific kind of historical time and place. So yeah, I think I just kind of took inspiration where I wanted it, where I found it.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. I'm going to sort of move on to a slightly different angle because I want to definitely leave plenty of time for our Q&A. So I was going to ask as a more general question, one of the maxims with all creative writing is rewriting. So I wanted to ask, what's something about the world of the story or the plot or the characters that really changed during the writing or the editing? I'll let you pick which one or both you talk about. Abiola, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, for me, like what I mentioned earlier, like with Emily's race changing, and initially she was like, her name wasn't Emily Nye. I don't remember what the name was. I know it was really rubbish, but she had a really awful name for. You know, she was like poor and a bit more, I guess, rough around the edges. And when I made her black, I don't know. I think it's just I just didn't want it to be stereotypical. I didn't want her to be poor, like in a gang. I didn't want her to come from like a bad family and she had to make herself good. I wanted her to have every single opportunity and be as privileged as I can make her, but still very complicated. So that changed a lot, but the actual characters didn't change. It was always a very diverse cast. That's really important to me because I live in Hackney, but I live on a very Turkish road. One of my best friends is Turkish, one's white, one's Caribbean. So, you know, everyone is very mixed and I wanted that to be clear. I live in London, it's a very, you know, diverse city. Those are the main things that changed. I think I changed the school. I think I made it more Japanese, sounds like the architecture and like some of like the things that they would be taught at school. That became, yeah, that wasn't like that before. But other than that, it pretty much was quite similar to what I wrote when I was 12, which is quite funny. So yeah.
Oh, prodigy.
That's so impressive. That's so impressive. Joseph, how about you? How did your process go and did things change? Did they not change? You weren't this when you were 12, were you?
No, I wasn't. No, not quite that forward. There were, in terms of narrative, there weren't massive changes. One of the biggest changes was, so it's told from two main perspectives, so Agatha and Jamie. And Agatha's got a very distinctive voice. And I found that a lot easier to write than Jamie's voice. I'm not quite sure why, but one of the biggest tasks I faced was basically rewriting all of Jamie's sections, so essentially half the book, because they just weren't good enough. I think, you know, it's the first book I'd written, and so I was learning a lot as I was going. There was a lot of kind of filtering language in there and just kind of pitfalls, you know, that I wasn't aware of. I'd fallen into all the usual traps, I think. So he needed a whole rewrite, which was, yeah, a pretty big, but definitely worthwhile exercise. And then a few characters that died, came back to life, a few that lived, died. I'm constantly changing my mind of who I'm killing off. Because, yeah, it's quite a brutal world. I mean, having said that, I did tone down the violence from the first rewrite. Just, you know, kind of nothing kind of was taken out in terms of what actually happened, but just kind of dialing it back a bit, taking it off the page so it wasn't quite as brutal. Because actually, I don't like reading violence particularly, but it is quite, like I say, a brutal world they live in. So I just wanted to make sure that everything that was there was kind of earned and necessary.
I mean, I think it's really good as a child, I remember reading books and being very irritated when I felt like they were talking down to me. There were no stakes, there was no real danger. Everyone is definitely going to be 100% okay. So I really love the fact in both of your books, you're really clear about even when there's magic and there's fantasy elements and sort of anything is technically possible, these people still are in danger. The battles they are fighting are real. Their courage is therefore meaningful courage. And I think that's so important in writing for teens and for kids, that, you know, we respect their intelligence and the fact that they know the world, unfortunately, is a dangerous place. And
yeah.
part of the fun of the empathy is getting out the other side. So on terms of that, and talking about stakes and challenges and killing people off or not, you're both writing series instead of standalone books, which is something I've not tackled yet, and I am just very impressed with anyone who's going to do that. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Do you plan the whole series from the start? How much detail do you know about each book in terms of the clues that you pick up from one book to a book like down the line? How do you juggle all of that? Because I have no idea, and I'm really interested to learn from you guys. Abiola, shall I usually come to you first?
Yeah, I'm not a great planner, to be honest. The only thing I plan is I write down all of the characters that are in Emily's school year, because there's so many kids. I just have to make notes of who's who. Apart from that, I don't ever really know what's going on, if I'm honest with you. I know the overall storyline, because with fantasy, it's usually like an epic war and, you know, good versus evil. It's a pretty standard template. But I was kind of like, I know there's going to be a war, but what happens before the war? And I didn't really know, and I kind of just wrote. And I think the problem with series is you have the main plot, but then you have all these little subplots that you kind of forget about, and then you have to kind of resolve it, and then it might come in as a second book, and then you're like, oh, why did I write all this extra stuff? But this book, I Am Becoming, was meant to be the last book, because it was meant to be a trilogy, but it was too big. And I didn't even know I could write so much. I was very proud of myself. So I was like, this is too big, and I'm not even at the war. Like, what's happening? So I had to stop it, and I have to re-pick it up to end it in a fourth book. But yeah, I'm not the best planner. And some of my characters, especially Locke's Knight's character, who's Emily's brother, he's like quite a complex character. And I don't really ever know what he's doing, and if he's actually for Emily or against her, I couldn't tell you. So I'm a very good blagger. So I'm just blagging my way through it, and we'll see what happens. It's worked so far for me, so I'm just going to keep going with that and see what happens.
Well, I guess that's good, because you've got the excitement of discovering the books as you go, instead of, oh, well, I know it, I've just got to write it. How about you, Joseph? What's that all like for you? Are you a planner? Are you a pantser? Are you a mixture of plotter and pantser?
I'm a bit of a pantser as well. I'm similar to Abiola. I think I like kind of the keeping it alive and having that creative freedom that you don't know where the characters are going to go, what's going to happen, and having like the excitement of discovering that and the creativity of discovering that as you go. And that was certainly the case for book one, because I wrote that not necessarily knowing that it was going to be a series. And then by the time I finished it, I was like, okay, yeah, I think this is going to be a series. And then had to kind of weave a few things in once I decided where 2 and 3 were going to go. And for 2 and 3, I certainly plotted them a lot more than the first, just to kind of, get that overall arc. But I also very much wanted them to be standalone books in their own right, so that you could, it's all one story, but I wanted all of them to have a start and an end, so that I get frustrated sometimes when you're reading a book and it's literally just cut off in the middle of the excitement, and they're kind of like, So yeah, they all end, and then there's just like loose ends left open to try and get people obviously to be intrigued enough to buy the next ones. But yeah, so I think I've certainly plotted more as I've gone along. But I do like that freedom of kind of keeping things a little bit, just so they can surprise me as we go.
Oh, that's brilliant. I think I'm just going to ask us, because we've had all the teasers of what's coming up next and the fact that it's a series. So can I ask you each, what are you writing out? I mean, obviously, Abiola, your third book isn't out until the 17th of September, but what comes after that? There's going to be a fourth book. Is there going to be a fifth book? Or is that going to be something we're going to wait and find out? Or are you working on other things too? Sounds like you do everything. I don't know where you get the time.
Well, right now, I'm preparing for the third book. I actually just signed to a new agency, the Ben Agency. So I wrote my very first commercial fiction. I've never not written fantasy before, and I found it really hard to be so not factual, but just to even things down to you know how GCSEs has changed from letters to numbers, just those things where you're like, what is going on? So I had to kind of get my head around all that. And yeah, so that's the book I'm working on at the moment, which is driving me a little bit insane, but it's okay, it'll be fine. And then after that, I will most likely move on to book 4 of Emily and just round that up. I hope it's the last book. I kind of feel like I'm dragging it on a little bit, and I'm kind of like, let's just end her and move on kind of thing. So I've got one more book, hopefully I get it done. And after that, I don't know. We're just going to blag it and see what comes next kind of thing. We'll see what happens.
Well, there's quite a lot to be going on with. There's 2 other books right now, maybe more. How about you, Joseph? So we've got another 2 in the series at least? Is it definitely
yeah, it's definitely going to be 3. So the second one is called The Broken Raven, and that comes out in February next year. So that continues the story from The Good Hawk. And I'm currently, just this week, kind of doing the final proofread on that. And then I am also editing the third. So the third is written, and I'm just about to start the kind of second round of edits on that. So yeah, they're keeping me busy. But in terms of the story's finished now, which was really weird, getting to an end of a trilogy and kind of being like, well, this is how it ends. Because even though I'm still editing a bit, essentially, I now know not huge amounts is going to change. So kind of saying goodbye to those characters that have been on this epic journey with me for so many years was quite emotional, but in a wonderful way. I'm very fond of them all.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. I think we're going to go over to our Q&A for a bit, and I've got a couple of other questions if we've got time for them. But, oh, look, we've got so many people in the Q&A. Let's dive down here and find out what we have. So let's start at the top and go down. Lauren Reed wants to know, how would you explain your writing process? Abiola, do you want to jump in?
I'm not the worst person for this. I don't think I have a writing process. I know I tell people, especially by the author school, I'm always like, guys, make sure you write every day. And I say all this stuff, and I don't do that, if I'm honest. I'm very good at deadlines. If I know this needs to be done by this time, I will work as many hours as I need to get it done. But I feel like if it's kind of meh, up in the air, I'm kind of okay, yes, I'm not write 2,000 words a day. That's probably the way you should do it. So I will tell you to do that. But I'm not great. I'm not great at doing that myself. So yeah, let's ask Joseph.
I'm quite strict with myself, in that I'm usually quite good at writing first thing in the morning. So I'll get up and I'll just start writing, and that those first kind of few hours in the morning, I can generally get a fair bit done. And then I plummet massively in the middle of the day and could just stare at a screen for 2 hours and not write a single word. And then when it gets to kind of 4, half 4 in the day, I feel the day is kind of slipping away. Suddenly I'm back on it, okay, and start writing some more. And I've kind of recognized that pattern, and now I'm I give myself the middle of the day off. So I write maybe 3 hours in the morning and then 2 or 3 at the end of the day. But yeah, generally write chronologically. Although actually with books 2 and 3, I separated the characters out. So both 2 and 3 have actually told from 3 perspectives, which is another reason I had to plot slightly more. Because they've all got quite distinct voices, I wrote the three kind of narratives separately and then weave them together. Hope that answers your question, Lauren.
Brilliant. I'm going to scroll down a bit and ask another question from Jacqueline Atta Hayford. As someone working on my first fantasy novel, I find myself getting bogged down in little details and I can't figure out how to move the plot forward, even though I have a plan. Is this something you struggle with, and do you have any tips for dealing with it? Abiola.
Yeah, I struggle with that a lot. What I do, or what works for me anyway, is I just leave the book. I leave it for like a few days, and usually something will click. And I'll be like, oh, that's the way to connect it. I do struggle sometimes to connect the dots because I kind of blag the story and then I'm kind of like, oh yeah, why did I do that? Where's that going to go? But I know eventually it will click. I just haven't found how to click it yet. So I would just leave it for a bit. And usually, like, if you might end up be like reading a book or watching a movie and then it will just click and you'll be like, oh my God, that's the best way to connect it. So I wouldn't stress about it. But also just remember, like, your first edit is like, everyone's first edit is pretty rubbish, to be honest. Like, you know, just literally write it down, get the words out, and then go back over it later. Don't think the first edit has to be perfect because no one's first edit is what's published in a book. So don't give yourself a hard time. Have an ice cream, go for a walk, chill out, come back to it and see what happens. That's my advice.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's great advice. You know, you'll by the time from writing a book to it getting published, you edit it so many times. Like every time you think it's finished, it's not. Like there'll be more opinions and more notes and you'll keep editing it. So you've got so many opportunities to fix anything that's not quite working. And yeah, your headspace one day will be completely different to another time that you approach it. So I agree, just kind of leave it as is. Keep writing, get the words down, and just have faith that it will kind of click into place at another point.
Fantastic advice. So one of the questions that I didn't get to is actually one of the questions that one of our Q&A lovely contributors are offering. So one thing that always comes up in writing advice for aspiring authors is to read widely and diversely and as much as possible, but definitely in the genre you're writing in. So I'm going to go over to Annalise Amoa, who said, oh no, I looked at the wrong question. Sorry, this is Tanya Jennings, who wanted to know, who are your favourite authors, especially in fantasy? Sorry, I was scrolling through too fast.
Yeah. Who are my favourite authors? What I would say, you know, I love Harry Potter, so I would say J.K. Rowling. But funny enough, because people compare my book a lot to Harry Potter, and I wrote my book before I'd even heard of Harry Potter, so I want to say great minds. I just want to throw that in there a little bit. In terms of other fantasy, I mean, I love Game of Thrones. I love the books as well, so I'd go with that. Yeah, I think that's about it. I read everything. So I feel like my favourite authors aren't necessarily in my genre, because I think I love chick lit. Don't ask me why, but I love chick lit so much. So like, you know, I could read like a Jane Green novel, which has nothing to do with anything I'm doing, but there might be something in the way she's written a character that I'll like a lot. So I think you should read in your genre. Like I think if you're writing YA, you should read YA for sure, so you understand what you can and can't do. But at the same time, I think you should read a diverse amount and not just stick, because I think like with fantasy, I feel like fantasy is very not obvious, but I feel like, you know, it's like how chick lit is, you know, it's going to be a girl that's probably a bit ditzy or whatever, it's going to meet a guy, she'll think it's the right guy, she gets with the guy, and it's like a similar like template. Fantasy is the same. It's like, you know, they're fighting for like a greater good and there's going to be some form of battle or war, and then You know what I mean? It's the same thing. It's just more, how are you going to do it that's different from the other book that done it? So I don't think you need to read like loads of fantasies to understand that personally, but I think you should read other writers in all different genres and just learn how they write, how they describe emotion, how they build their characters as well. I think you'll learn a lot from that.
Joseph,
my turn.
how about you? What are your favourites, your influences?
The first like proper fantasy I remember reading as a child was Ian Irvine's fantasy series. So he starts with View from the Mirror Quartet, and I've always loved. He's since written, I think, 4 either trilogies or quadrilogies. Is that the right word? Yeah, and I've read all of those. I've always been a big fan of his. I love Garth Nix, his the Sabriel trilogy by the Old Kingdom. It's definitely a big influence. I'm a big fan of Patrick Ness. I've just read Burn, his new book, which was phenomenal, so good. And similar, kind of like an alternate reality, but with dragons in it. Kind of a real mixed bag, but and similarly, I kind of read quite widely. I love fantasy, especially when it's done well. But I love reading anything I can get my hands on. I like all kinds of genres. So yeah, a bit of everything.
Fantastic, thank you. And now I'm definitely going to come to Annalise Moa. Sorry for that, I'm losing my place in the Q&A. So Annalise had several questions, but why don't we go with the first one for now, which is, what is the hardest thing about being an author, and what is the most enjoyable thing? Abiola, what do you think?
Oh, I think what Joseph said, actually, the hardest thing is when you think you're done with a book and you're not done with it, and the editor or your agent, whoever it is like, we need to work on this. And you're like, oh, can we just leave it alone? That's probably the bit I dislike a lot. I don't like having to edit. And I know it's part of the process, but that's the bit I'm always like, oh, I can't wait for it to be over. I know what the end result will be. I don't like going through it, if that makes sense. So I don't enjoy that. But what I enjoy the most, I think there's no better feeling than like getting your book for the first time and you're like, oh my God, I wrote a book. And it's like, you know, it's like sick kind of thing. And I really love going into schools and doing school visits. I've missed that a lot since lockdown. And yeah, I love like just talking to the kids because they just say the funniest things and they just ask questions. Sometimes I'm just like, I didn't think of that. It's always a good thing. So those are my favorite things about being an author.
I would say, yeah, I'm totally with you on the edits. I mean, the day that I get the edit letter through for the next round of edits is always a really dark day, especially because you complete you perfect a book in your head, you get it to exactly where you want it to be, and then all the notes come in, and so it's like ripping up something finished and then trying to fit it back together again. So yeah, that's never fun. In terms of the best thing, I should say though, in terms of the edits, 100% my editors are like, they're brilliant and they're always right. That's what makes it so frustrating. Even though you're so reluctant to do it, you know that it's going to make it better. So yeah, it's all just kind of part of the process. And I think my favorite thing is interacting with, both adults and kids, but particularly kids that have read and enjoyed the book. I actually had someone message me on Twitter yesterday whose 9-year-old daughter had made a Minecraft version of My World because she loved the book so much, and she put it up on YouTube, so I went and watched it. And it's incredible just to think that, you know, some girl out there who I've never met has been so like enjoyed the book and been inspired by it to the point where they're creating their own version of the world online. And yeah, those kind of interactions and stuff I just find incredible. It's amazing.
Fantastic. I think we'll go to Anya Matani, who wanted to know, how do you develop good character dynamics and relationships between the characters? Oh, wow, that's a great question. Really complicated. Abiola, what do you think?
That is a good question. I think it's always to remember that relationships are really complex. And I think especially when you write for kids or YA, it's really easy to kind of make everything kind of like really happy and just be like, oh, everyone gets along really well and they had a fight, but they're okay now. And it's like everyone kind of makes that error. But especially if you're around teens a lot, I'm always around teenagers, the things they fight about and talk about is so funny to me. And it's so like weirdly complex, but not, if that makes sense. And sometimes like, you know, if they're super aggressive, there's always something deeper and it all links together. So I think it's just remembering that relationships, no matter how much you love someone, just like real life, they are complicated and everyone has good and bad and everyone has flaws. And I think it's remembering that with your characters. And I know you can love your characters so much and you want them to almost be perfect, but that's not real life. Like in my book, my first book with Emily, she starts off a bit like kind of a bit of a brat, like she's not really nice. And this blogger, she's like 14, messaged me and she really liked, but she was like, yeah, at the beginning I was like, I don't like this girl. And I was like, oh, okay. She was like, but then like, you know, like I grew to like her. And I was like, yeah, because Emily's going through stuff. I think it's unrealistic for her to be so nice all the time. She's a bit bratty and a bit, you know, she's got some anger issues. She's a bit messed up. Do you know what I mean? I think she should be. So I think it's remembering all of those things, and that's what makes characters interesting, not just when they're super nice all the time and everyone loves them, because that's just not real.
Yeah, I think you know, just kind of following on from that, also in terms of the situations the characters find themselves in, and putting characters together, like creating that conflict, whether that's because of two characters that you've made opposing in their views or the way they see the world, or because of the situation they happen to be in, you know, what's happening around them, and maybe they have contrasting views on that. Those ways of kind of orchestrating conflict to see how different characters react to that and how they react off each other, I think makes really interesting kind of dynamic relationships as well.
Those are really fascinating insights. I hope that you're all loving these questions. We've got even more questions, which is so brilliant. So Elizabeth Frattaroli wanted to know, I hope I'm getting these right. I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic. I'm really, really bad at names that I don't know. Sorry, I'm trying. Wanted to know, if you were able to visit any fantasy world from any book, which one would you choose and why? Oh, that's a dangerous question. It's so fascinating that you die.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's really hard. I was going to initially say, like, I'd have to be in Game of Thrones, but everyone dies in Thrones, so I don't want to go there. So we're not going to the other one. But probably Harry Potter. I think everyone kind of slyly, at some point in their life, wanted to be involved in Harry Potter and just to see what house I'm in, if I can do a Patronus charm, whatever them things are called. So I would probably say that world is something that I think has been developed so well, and the imagery of it is so amazing. That's definitely, I think, something I'd like to take a day trip to and see what's going on. So yeah, I would pick that world.
I had a sly look to my bookshelf and I'm really bad with questions like this. I'm like, what am I going to say? So I had a quick look. I'm going to say Ready Player One. Which
yeah,
absolute favourite books. Yeah, to have a day just kind of playing in the Oasis where you can literally just do anything you want. I'm a big gamer, so yeah, to go into obviously the book is dystopian and the Oasis does terrible things to people and shuts them off from the real world. But I think I could, you know, be all right just for one day to visit this online world where you can be who you want to be and anything's possible. That'd be pretty cool.
Fantastic. I'm going to do an anonymous question now. So Anonymous wanted to know, do you feel guilty when you kill people off? You have to make sure you don't get too attached. That's such a good question. Abiola.
That's a really good question. I do feel guilty, actually, and only when I talk to other writers do I realise that it's very normal. Like when Joe said he's finished his trilogy and it made him sad, I was like, oh my God, I feel like I would actually cry when I stopped with Emily because I've had her for so long. But yeah, in the third, I don't think I've killed anyone yet, but in the but in the third book, people do die, and one of my favorite characters does die, and I literally was like, oh, but I don't want to, but I was like, it doesn't make sense for them to still be here. It just doesn't make any sense. And it did hurt. Some of them I didn't care about, to be honest. And I was like, oh yeah, you need to go. But that particular person, I actually was really sad about. But I think it just made sense to the story to do it. So yeah, you do get attached to them because you built them so much. And even if they're not a main character, they're so important in like how certain things work. I'm very nervous for the fourth book. That's like literally where like the proper battle happens, and I'm like, I literally keep changing my life. Who's gonna die? Who's not dying? I don't know. See what happens.
I was the same going into book 3, which is, kind of big epic battle at the end. Not entirely sure who was going to survive, which scared me, but I enjoyed that about the process. It kept it alive. It's like, what's going to happen? Who's going to survive? And I feel massively guilty killing people off. But if the story demands it, like I'd never do it just for the sake of it. If the story demands it, then it happens. And sometimes, like I said earlier, characters miraculously come back to life in another edit, and then I feel better about it. Oh no, that's right. And then other ones, I'm like, oh no, sorry, actually, I think you're going to die. And you're like, oh, I feel guilty writing it, but that's the world. It's got to happen.
So I think we've got room for maybe 2 more questions. So Rahila Hussein wanted to know, she said, by the way, she's really enjoying this discussion so far, so thank you guys. And she wanted to know how much of your time is spent on research versus plotting or writing?
That's a good question. I think because it's fantasy, I find fantasy really easy to write. And I think it's just because I'm just making it up. So I don't really spend that much. I guess sometimes if I have an idea, I will question, is this my idea? Did I watch it somewhere? Or because there's so many, like when I first wrote Emily, there wasn't like loads of superhero stuff. And then once I'd written it and like was growing up as a teenager, then Harry Potter came out, then that show Heroes came out, then Marvel became like a whole thing. And so then you're like, hold on, is this my idea or is it like not my idea? So I have those moments, but not really. Maybe actually when I was using some Japanese wording in my books, I was Googling to see what it meant. But other than that, no, I just make it up pretty much. So there's not much research that goes. Oh no, actually, no. My Emily's character, her godparents foster children. So I had researched about fostering and adopting and how that all works, and is it realistic that she'd have these kids for X? I was doing all that, but that's probably the most research I've done with the book. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do masses for mine. Like I'm not the kind of person, certainly, and that kind of creates a whole world and makes all the decisions about the world before starting writing. I did little bits of research before each of the book, but mainly it was just a process of, as I went along, as I wrote, if there was something that I felt could do with a bit more depth, or kind of working out how a certain part would fit, then I would do the research at the time. But in general, yeah, the majority of the time I spend on the book is the actual writing of it.
I think we're going to do one last question. I'm going to pick the one that 2 different people have asked in various ways. We'll just do a quick zip through. So one anonymous attendee wanted to know how you found writing in lockdown, and Michelle Fida wanted to say, how has the pandemic affected your creativity or work schedule? So similar questions. What has lockdown done to your writing and your creativity?
I think like most people, like when we got into lockdown, I think everything was so crazy. It was really hard to be creative. I didn't write for, I don't know how long we were in lockdown for. I don't remember anything now. I didn't write for a while. I know that because when I don't write for a while, I feel funny. I can't explain it, but I feel like, I don't know, like I need to do it. I can't explain it. So I was feeling like that. And I was like, oh my God, I haven't wrote for ages. Why haven't I? And I didn't read. I just kind of, I started baking, which is funny because I don't bake. So yeah, I was doing that a lot. But then I think once we were in lockdown and it was kind of clear what was going on, I think then I kind of calmed down and was able to refocus. But yeah, so it did stump me for a minute. And all of my friends are creative, so they all kind of felt the same way. They knew they had to kind of put everything online to still earn money, but it was kind of that whole like, how do I do it? I don't want to do it. It was that. So I think everyone was super like, you know, stumped by it. But then I think as it calmed down, it was kind of like, oh, okay, like this is just the new normal. Let's adapt and let's crack on. But yeah, I thought I would have like wrote more. Like you would think you would, didn't it? But I didn't.
For me, I was actually on deadline when lockdown started. So the first 2 weeks, I was finishing off the first draft of book 3. So I almost, I was already on a really tight deadline. So I almost didn't notice it had happened really, because I was essentially doing the same thing as I was doing afterwards. I mean, not that I didn't notice it was happening, but my routine didn't massively change, I guess, because I was still, just kind of writing every day, trying to get the draft finished. And then once that was handed in, because I'd been so intensely working on that for the last 6 months, I just gave myself some time off. And similar, did some baking, did some painting, went for nice walks in the forest, and that was a really nice, just kind of a reset time. And then about halfway through lockdown, I had kind of the first round of edits come back. Obviously, I had the dark day that we all have when the first edits first come in. And then it was actually, by that point, it was actually quite nice because I'd had maybe 6 weeks of not really doing anything, to have something to focus on. I did find it hard some days, and I was slightly less focused than maybe I would have been normally. But I was also really grateful to have something to kind of fill the days with, to feel like I was achieving something, I guess. So yeah, it's for me, I think I've been quite lucky. It's worked out all right.
Well, I know that we can't wait to see the fruits of your labour. So, guys, do remember, Abiola's book is the new one, the third in the Emily Knight series, is out on September 17th. Get your pre-orders in. And Joseph's new book is out in February. So as soon as the pre-orders are active on that, you jump on that button and enjoy for Abiola, the first 2, and for Joseph, the first book. In the meantime, and I'm afraid, I'm really sorry, that's all we've got time for. But our lovely authors are on Twitter, and maybe you can catch them there if you've got some extra questions. They're probably not right immediately. I think everyone needs a cup of tea. But it's been such a pleasure talking to you both, and I've been fascinated by everything you're saying, and I've learned a lot, particularly about how you approach series, which is so exciting. But all of it has just been lovely. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everyone who's watching and everyone who's joining in this virtual YALC weekend. One final reminder that the author's books are available to buy or pre-order, so take a look at your chosen retailer. And again, the links are in the chat thing if you're live with us, and if you're on YouTube afterwards, it's down in the description. So do go there and check it out. And also check out Walker YA's social media pages for giveaways, for opportunities to read proofs and samplers. And we all hope to see you in the world again, in real world, next year at YALC in person. But thank you so much. Thank you to our authors. Thank you to our audience. Thanks for the amazing questions. Have a lovely weekend, and thank you to Walker and YALC for having us here. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Maxine.
Bye.
Bye.